Welcome, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers. I welcome you all. You may not really know it. It may just be a concept to you. But you do have a phase or facet of your existence which has nothing to do with the mind. It can observe mind, but it certainly is not the mind. Most of us, by the time we are grown up, fully identify with the mind and body as us.
Ed, fix your audio jack, microphone jack.
What about now?
Yeah, say something. It seems better.
By the time we become adults, we fully identify with our minds as being us. And if you operate with the mind as the center of your existence, there will always be confusion. As long as you dwell in words and concepts, ideas, there'll be confusion. Because the mind is quite limited. And the feeling that you know something does not come from the mind. It comes from something deeper than the mind, from the one who knows the mind. And that one who knows the mind can exist spectacularly well without the aid of the mind. If you are mind-centered, which I was for a great deal of my life, you're relatively contracted. Your world is defined as shit that happens in your mind, ideas in the mind, understanding with the mind. But it's not the mind that understands, it just generates thoughts, ideas. But there's a presence underneath the mind, prior to the mind, which is the one that understands. Now this one who understands is enormously large compared with the mind. The mind contracts you to your body and to itself with its thought processes and judgments. So many live from the mind, almost everyone. And you spend your adolescence and childhood and early adulthood studying concepts in school. How to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, calculus, algebra, words, reading the great novels like Great Expectations and all of the other ones. And this solidifies your identity as a body-mind. But that's a false identity. That's not who you really are. You can really lose your mind and feel free because you become 1,000 times larger than when the mind dominated your life. No mind is infinitely large and is that which knows everything, including what the mind knows. But it isn't confined to the mind. It knows everyday things like a tree, walls, house, another person, television. It knows it in a non-verbal way. One of the ways to get to know this no mind is through meditation, just resting, sitting in a chair or on a ton or meditation cushion, sitting cross-legged, maybe facing a wall with a candle in front of you. And you just sit, not doing anything, not focused on anything, not concentrating on anything. But you just sit doing nothing. It's called shikantaza by the Japanese. Doing nothing. And at first it's hard to obtain because the mind keeps talking to you until you learn how to sit strongly and the mind disappears all by itself. That's one way. That's the long, hard way. Another way is to watch the mind. Watch how thoughts arise. Watch how thoughts disappear. And you ask yourself, is this watcher part of the mind? Or is that which watches the mind not mental at all, but something prior to the mind, deeper than the mind? Some call this pure awareness, but that's kind of misleading. It's a concept. I'll only state that there is something that exists prior to the mind that is also aware of the entire world, your own body, your own house. For the act of knowing is not known by the mind, but by this entity, which is not really an entity. It's known by the witness, which is not really a witness. It's not a thing. It's a process, a flowing of the mind. And once that flowing disidentifies with the mind, it can expand infinitely as it happened with Robert when he was 14, sitting in a math class taking a test. But the biggest block to doing that is fear. I remember when I used to be able to go first beyond the mind, I felt frightened because I felt stupid. And my mind was saying, how can this be a good place to be, being stupid? It was scary too, in the sense that my prime guardian, the mind, which I thought protected me by being in control, was not really in control. That I was bigger than the mind. But it didn't seem that way when it first started to happen. When it first started to happen, I got worried. Who's gonna watch the store, so to speak, if the mind goes away? Many of you are still busy with the things of the mind rather than resting in no mind. And the hard thing is, you, whoever you are, will resist losing your mind. My motto is, the mind is a wonderful thing to waste. Get rid of it. Just be without the mind. I guarantee you, if you read Ramana, you read Nisargadatta, you read Robert, you're going to get confused because the concepts offered are so different from our Western day of regular daily life. But oh, what peace and rest you find when you finally get rid of the mind. And the mind is still there, but you don't take what it's saying seriously. And you see that all concepts are fake news, all of them. And when you see all concepts are fake news, you laugh. You say to yourself, does that silly girl really think that this is true? Does she really think there are lizard people from out of space who become embodied and disguise themselves as humans while they eat babies and drink babies' blood? Yet people believe this shit, as well as other stuff just as strange. But then at the same time, you have to realize that everything you hear or read is a point of view that's shared by millions and millions and maybe billions of people, but still a point of view. So you relax. There's nothing to learn anymore. And if you're into learning, you're going to be confused. You will be confused. Because there is a war of ideas, and always has been, since the beginning of language. People have had different points of view and try to enforce their point of view on others so that they feel more comfortable being among friends. There's the Stalinist point of view, the Hitlerian point of view, the Roosevelt point of view. And nowadays we have the Trump point of view and Trumpers' point of view, as well as the mainstream media point of view. And they're struggling to see who's dominant. But they're just points of view. Now you can pretend to be intellectual and argue we should determine which point of view to hold depending on the intended and unintended happenings related to taking that point of view. What happens if we adopt Trump's point of view, that he's center of the universe? What happens if we take Biden's point of view, is that we're a community and we have to find peace within ourselves in order to get things done, which still requires us to bring the Trumpers into our reality somehow. My own point of view is this should be done by changing the educational system. The educational system should have, as a high school course, economics. An exploration of the various economic systems, Keynesian economics, Friedmanian economics. It should have some grasp of modern political movements, what their aims are, and what their roots are, so we better understand each other's point of view. We should have groups of people with very different points of view talking to each other about a set of subjects. This may loosen us from our point of view and our adhered to concepts. We should have at least one course on the mind. What it is and what its limitations are. and how it serves us or dominates us. My mind dominated me for most of my life. I was always confused. Till I met Robert and I relaxed or began to relax. But actually, before I met Robert, for many years I knew emptiness. I knew what the absence of mind was like from meditation, thousands of hours of meditation. But then I began reading Nisargadatta, even before I met Robert. Went to Ramesh's talks when he was in the United States and was introduced to a point of view that was quite rational and logical and completely contrary to even all of the spiritual points of view I had had before, as well as common sense. That's when my real spirituality, may say, started to emerge. But it's hard to desire to live beyond the mind when you don't know what the benefits are. It's hard to deal with the sense of stupidity that comes to you when the mind is absent and you feel its lack of presence. And you take that lack of presence as something dangerous. Becoming dumb as a rock is something hard to do for most people. But when those deeper areas of the self emerge into your awareness, the job becomes much easier because it's not your job. You just let it unfold within you. You just relax, and ignorance begins to drain away, and does so for the rest of your life. If you try to describe existence with words, you can't ever get there. It's too complex to be grasped by mind. Mind abstracts certain elements which you can grasp as generalities and holds on to them for security. But when the mind rests and doesn't try to grasp anything, you begin to make some real spiritual progress by being detached from your own point of view. And that allows for you to see or experience everything in a new way. No longer limited by your intellectual understanding. The hard thing to believe, though, is when you're going to a spiritual teacher, let's say Nisargadatta or Robert or Muktananda, when they teach, they realize the truth is not in the mind, but convincing the mind to let go and to live according to that inner knowing, which is the real knowing. That inner knowing, let's say, of everything around us, when it gets into the mind, starts looking around using the mind to explain its own feeling of knowing. The knower is fundamental. The mind is only added on. And the various ideas go through the mind, and the knower accepts or rejects those ideas as true or not true. And as long as the knower does that, there's going to be conflict and confusion, because concepts cannot grasp the world or existence or even your own self. Your own self can only be experienced in silence. And when it's experienced in silence, after a while, you lose fear of no mind. And you expand into infinity. Now that itself sounds like a concept. You can try to imagine yourself expanding into infinity like Robert talks about his awakening experiences. Consciousness going beyond the mind, going beyond the moon, the planets, the stars. But that's really a conceptual description. Real absence of mind can't be grasped with concepts, nor can the relief or peace be found as long as you're just imagining what it's like to go beyond the mind. The mind's fooling you into thinking you have gone beyond the mind by using elevated concepts of spirituality. Freedom is found by going beyond the mind. Peace is found by going beyond the mind. Worry is lost by going beyond the mind. And really saying going beyond the mind is incorrect. It's really a matter of staying prior to the mind, in the deeper totality of consciousness that you feel. You rest in the universe itself. What you are inside as well as what you perceive outside, beyond the skin. It's one wholeness. And that's as close as you can get to your true identity. And that's identity with the totality of the existential, the existing. Because the non-existent can't be perceived. And then some people make up ideas about the functioning of this non-existent mind, the so-called noumenal self. that which exists prior to the mind. But they fool themselves if they try to use words to say what it's all about. That's a continuation of the mind's attempt to understand everything and to control everything. There is no correct understanding. You have to let go of understanding. If you let go of understanding and you're not feeling frightened by the experience, you can become much more open to what's happening in the world and in conversation with other people. You're more aware of them rather than figuring out how to answer what they're asking or what they're saying. You see their facial movements more clearly. You understand where they're coming from more clearly. But if you have a mindset, you're always trying to convince others that your point of view is right. Because that's what the mind does, makes right and wrong. Or you may take a meta-analysis point of view and you say, well, what is right or wrong can be determined by looking at the consequences of one point of view over another point of view and saying that the outcomes are more favorable with the first point of view, so we must assume the first point of view is correct, and that the second point of view has negative consequences, which we don't want. But that too is a point of view. So, being a non-scientist in your everyday life, you don't need points of view to guide you as to what to do. You just shut the fuck up and do what comes naturally to you. Even if that means studying for a test, this is what comes to you. Of the choices you make, some require you to wear the mind a certain amount each day. But the more you wear a mind, the more naturally you'll go back into mental movements and becoming trapped or contracted into the mind and body. I love you all. I want you all to be free. Free of your own mind. How do I convince you that your mind is the problem, not the world? Some people here are quite immersed in the mind all the time. As Robert said about me, you're too smart. You know everything. Meaning I should shut the fuck up and become quiet and stupid. Sansanim used to stress that all the time. Somebody starts talking bull. You take a stick and hit the floor and yell cuts to cut the thinking, cut the talking. Then he has koans, where he asks questions for you to answer until you finally realize you're playing his game by taking his intellectual problems and making it significant to you. Now, he had one koan, supposedly the final koan. And how did it go? A mouse is eating the cat's food, but the cat's bowl is broken. What does that mean? And we used to do all kinds of pantomimes to say what we would do. Pretend to sweep up the food in the broken bowl. Chase the mouse away so the cat could eat. Or simply say cuts. What a stupid fucking question that's unanswerable. And then you change the subject to say something about, it's kind of cold in here. Can you turn up the heat? Or did you want a second cup of tea? You'd bring it back to the present and everyday mind and get that spiritual principle out of your mind, or the koan out of your mind. He used to tell me that as long as you're in the mind and doing spiritual practices, you're trapped. Don't be trapped in the mind. The mind in itself is no good. It's just a problem solver, or something used to count with number of apples on hand. It's a storekeeper mind. It's a housekeeping mind. It's a hunter's mind. But when a storekeeper gets loosed in heaven and starts asking how everything works, where everything is stored, he gradually gains weight and falls back into the hell of earth. Having no mind, no understanding, is kind of terrifying at first. To not have the reliability of a mind to depend on for control, for safety, for protection. But when you learn to live without it, you find such freedom there and openness that you almost always feel good because you're not focused on the mind and problems, but you're focused on just being. And when you focus on just being, you find that that is happiness. Your beingness is happiness. Just feeling your being, resting in your being, resting in that emptiness of thoughts is happiness and peace. And you also develop a kind of sense of humor that can be quite cutting. Because you see how everybody that thinks is full of shit. And you want to get rid of that shit by saying to them, in a sense, shut the fuck up and just be yourself. And you have no idea what that means if it's said to you while you're thinking. How can I be myself? Am I not myself now, thinking about all this? But there is existence without the mind, and it's happiness, peace, rest, openness, non-contraction, relaxed, 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 relaxed. It's freedom. Freedom from the mind and the tensions of the mind. Freedom from pursuing truth by the mind. Because you rest as truth, even though not a word is said. I love you all. Today's lesson was devoted to just allowing yourself to become stupid and let go of all the missions you've given yourself in life, all the careers you've given yourself in life, all the seeking you've done because of the mind, goals you have, and just become nothing, nothing special. Useless dirt. You'll be useless but very happy. And I know this will be so very hard for many of you. So very hard. Anybody have any questions or statements?